So first of all, the learning, in addition for Erwin, it should be for the next few weeks. It should be for Leah, Lisa, Bas, Bracha, and Ephraim Halevi. So we're at the Daf Lamed Aleph and Mebez, the bottom line. Just to review one quick point, and then what you need one point of introduction. We had a machlokes yesterday between Rabbi Nosson and the Chachamim, and that is, do you need kavana by shchita? Not a carbon, a regular animal. According to Rabbi Nosson, you don't need kavana at all. I could throw a knife against the wall because I'm trying to do practice, and it happens to cut an animal's neck. It's kosher shchita. According to Rabbi Nosson, zero kavana b'chlal. According to the Rabbanon, no, you need somewhat kavana. What do you need? You don't need kavana for shchita, but you need kavana for chituch. You have to know that you're cutting the pipes. Do you happen to know that that's a shchita? Not necessarily. You have to know you're using the knife to cut an animal. Again, the subtlety is obviously going to be there. Lamed Aleph is the bottom line. So that was a machlokes between Rabbi Nosson and the Chacham. Now, one more point you have to know, and that is that when you're performing an act, we had this once before recently, and that is that when you're performing the para aduma, any stage of the para aduma, if you're doing another avoid at the same time, so you're multitasking. So while you're shechting the para aduma, you're writing a check, whatever. If you're multitasking, it's puzzle. It invalidates the para aduma. Now, that invalidation, it's very clear, is only if you're doing the multitask on purpose. Meaning, like the case, I'm writing a check while I'm shechting the animal. I know what I'm doing. If you multitask, it's aser. And Rashi says the reason why it passes the para aduma is because we're afraid that you'll be distracted. When you're multitasking, you'll be distracted. Now, there is a secondary psul. Now, by the way, that psul of multitasking does not apply if it's unintentional. Meaning, if let's say while you're shechting, you happen to bang into knock a light on accidentally, that's not a psul. The psul of the multitasking is because you're so oisik in multitasking, we're afraid it'll distract you. I didn't mean to turn the light on, so that won't be a psul. There is a secondary psul though, if you shecht two animals at the same time, and one of them is a paraduma, it's no good. Because the paraduma, the pasuk specifies that it has to be shechted alone, which means if I shecht another animal, that's going to be an issue. If as long as the other animal is considered a ma'isa shchita, distraction or not, you can't do it. So the other actions are based on distraction, but shchita is a secondary issue. So let's see it inside. The Gemara says, Amar Rava. Rava clarifies, and he says like this: Shachad para. If you shecht a para aduma, v'shachad behema acheres ima, and at the same time you line up the para aduma right next to a cow, and you shecht them both at the same time. Now you're doing this on purpose. It's intentional. So the halacha is l'divrei kol psula. That's puzzle. Now let me ask you a question. Why is it puzzle? Now I told you, multitasking is an issue because of distraction. Now over here, Rashi explains, what distraction? I'm shechting. The multitask is shchita, so it's not going to distract me from shechting. On the contrary, it's going to focus me up. So Rashi says, this is the other issue I mentioned, which is, the pasuk specifies that a paraduma must be shechted alone, which means if you shecht another animal, even if it won't distract you, it's oisa, it has to be shechted singular. If you shecht another animal, it's a problem. Okay, let's keep going. Now, here's the nafkamina. I told you before, it's a machlokes between Rabbi Nosson and the Chachamim. If you shecht an animal unintentionally, is it considered a ma'isa shchita? So here's the nafkamina. I'm shechting a paraduma, and then as I keep going with my hand, I accidentally shecht another animal. So again, if it's a ma'isa shchita, then it passes the paraduma. Why? Because if it's a ma'isa shchita, that means I shechted another animal with the paraduma, which is an invalidation. If unintentional shchita is not a ma'isa shchita, then it's fine, because it didn't shecht another animal, and because it was unintentional, it wasn't distracting. So this machlokes between Rabbi Nosson and the Chachamim, whether unintentional shchita is considered a ma'isa shchita, would be a nafkamin of whether it would invalidate the para aduma if you unintentionally shechted at the same time. Says the Gemara, nishchada behema acheres ima, if you accidentally shechted another animal with the para aduma. L'Rabbi Nosson, according to Rabbi Nosson, who holds that invalid shchita, in unintentional shchita is a shchita, so then para psula behema kshera. The animal is kosher because you shechted it, but the paraduma is invalid because you shechted another animal with the paraduma. And again, I want to make that point. Although the invalidation is not because of distraction, because over here I'm shechting and it's unintentional. Unintentional is not distracting. It's a secondary issue that you're not allowed to shecht any other animal with the paraduma. But l'Rabbanan, who holds that unintentional shchita is not a ma'aser shchita, it's nothing, then the paraduma is going to be kosher, because I didn't shecht another animal with the paraduma, because unintentional shchita is insignificant. Parak sher l'Rabbanan psula. So, by the way, the Gemara just did this. Now, while this might have seemed complicated, if you know the shitas, it's pretty pashut. So says the Gemara Pshita, there's a machlokes of whether unintentional shchita is a ma'aser shchita. So you said it's negeh for paraduma. Okay, shkayach, whatever. So what's the chiddush? So the Gemara says the chiddush is, according to Rabbi Nassan, I unintentionally shecht an animal with the paraduma. So we said it's possible. Why? Because unintentional shchita is a ma'aser shchita, and if you shecht another animal with a paraduma, it's invalid. Now let me ask you a question. Why is it invalid? So I told you, there's distraction, but distraction doesn't apply by unintentional acts. What's the other issue? The issue is you're not allowed to shecht any other animal with a paraduma. That's a chiddush. I'll tell you why. Before this Gemara, I could have understood that when the Torah says don't shecht two animals at the same time when one of them is a paraduma, maybe the Torah only meant two paradumas. Meaning maybe the Torah says only shecht one paraduma at a time. So we're saying that means you can't shecht a paraduma with any other animal, even a mundane animal, even Chullin. I would have argued that the Torah only meant don't shecht two paradumas at the same time. Each paraduma should have its own glory, whatever. Kamash Malan, the chiddush of this Gemara is that no, even Chullin that shechted with a paraduma is invalid. That's the chiddush of the Gemara. Nishchada behema acheres l'Rabbanan of Nasan itzichalei. So kataytachamini, you might think v'shachar osa Rachmana. The pasuk says v'shachar osa, which means the paraduma must be shechted singular. V'loy oisa v'chaverta, which is the source that you're not allowed to shecht a secondary animal. I would have argued I would argue that maybe the Torah only asks two paradumas. But maybe a paraduma with a regular animal is allowed. Kamash malan, it's not allowed. Just to conclude this sugya, the Gemara then says, Chotach dalas ima. If one cut a paraduma and then a gourd at the same time, so he put a carrot right next to the paraduma's head, so he shechted the paraduma and cut the carrot, so that's sure a problem, because he's distracting himself by doing another multitask. He's cutting a carrot. This is intentional. But if he accidentally cuts a carrot or a gourd, then it's kosher, because it's only considered a distracting act if you do it intentionally. Over here it's unintentional. Unintentional is not going to invalidate the paraduma. New topic. The Mishnah will now address the sugya of shehiyah. Shehiyah not for the laws of Shabbos, but shehiyah for this discussion means you're not allowed to pause mid-shchita. And if you pause mid-shchita for the amount of time that it takes to shecht an animal, so let's say how long does it take to shecht a cow? 20 seconds, whatever, 10 seconds, let's say 10 seconds. If you pause mid-shchita for 10 seconds, no good. So halacha Moshe Messina. Zak the Mishnah, nafla hasakin v'gbia. If mid-shchita you drop the knife and you pick it up, so that's a pause. Right? You got to pick it up. That's a pause. Or naflu ga kela v'gbia. Or while you're shechting, your jacket falls off you and you go pick it up. So mid-shchita you pause to pick up an item. Or hishchiz is a sakin v'oyaf. Or let's say while you're so tired, you sharpen the knife, you start shchita and you're just like, I need a break. And you literally just let me give it a break, mid-shchita. So you pause mid-shchita. And when you pause, someone else continues, meaning you either pause and you continue, or you pause and someone else continue, but i.e. you pause mid-shchita. If the pause was long enough to do the ma'aser shchita, then it's psula, then it's pasul. That is the shear according to the Chachamim. The shear for shehiyah is the amount of time that it takes to shecht. The Gemara will clarify. Rav Shimon Oimar imsha kedei biker. Rav Shimon says no, it's the amount of time to check the knife. Okay, the Gemara will clarify it as well. So according to Rav Shimon, it's not the amount of time to shecht. The pause has to be long enough to invalidate, has to be long enough to check the knife, inspect the knife. Okay. Zak the Gemara, what does it mean? How long is the pause for invalidation? So we said the amount of time to shecht. Does that mean to finish the shechita you're doing, or an entire shechita? So Menashe's pause shechting. Let's say it takes 10 seconds to shecht an animal. You go 5 seconds then pause. So it says the invalidation is if you pause long enough to shecht. Does that mean to finish the shechita? So that would be 5 seconds, or the entire ma'aser shechita 10 seconds. So it says the Gemara, Amirav kedei shechita behema acheres. It means to shecht another animal, i.e. an entire ma'aser shechita, not to finish the shechita of this animal, but rather an entire ma'aser shechita. Amila Rav Kahana v'Rav Asi l'Rav k'dei shchita behema l'behema v'oif l'oif oidel ma'af behema l'oif. Oh, here's the shayla. Okay. Let's say it takes 10 seconds to shecht a cow and 5 seconds to shecht a chicken. When I'm shechting a chicken and I pause, how long does the pause invalidate? The pause to shecht a chicken or to pause to shecht a cow? Meaning if I'm shechting a cow, it takes 10 seconds. So if I'm shechting a cow and I pause mid-cow, it'll invalidate if it's 10 seconds of a pause. But what if I'm shechting a chicken? Now chickens are 5 seconds. So he says, the shear is the amount of time it takes to shecht. So then you ask the rabbi, shecht what? Shecht a chicken? Because you're shechting a chicken or shechting a cow? That's the shayla. So it says the Gemara, Amar lahu, lo yhava b'dichna le b'chavivi dishana. Interesting, very interesting, eye-opening into their relationship. Rav's uncle was Rav Chia, the great Rav Chia, who was the compiler of all the brises. Rav says, they asked Rav, how long when you're pausing by a chicken? Chicken or a cow? So Rav says, I wasn't comfortable by my uncle enough to ask him. Meaning, Rav, he was a young bacher at the time, and he said, now I know the answer, but I couldn't at the time. I couldn't ask my uncle Rav Chia. I wasn't comfortable enough to ask my uncle. It's interesting. So at that point, Rav didn't have the answer because he says, I wasn't comfortable to ask my uncle Rav Chia, the psak. It's the same shayla, nothing changed. So says the Gemara, Itmar, Amir Rav, so what is the psak? You're shechting a chicken and you make a pause by the chicken. Is it the shear k'dei shchitas chicken or k'dei shchitas bull? So it says the Gemara, k'dei shchitas behem l'behem v'ayif l'ayif. Each animal, it's for said animal. Chickens have their own time limit, cows have their own. Shmuel Amar afilu behem l'ayif. Shmuel says no. The shear is to shecht a cow. That's true by all animals, even if you're shechting a chicken. V'chein ki asar Rav Amar Rav Yechanan afilu behem l'ayif. Rav Chanina Amar, Rav Chanina says, he has a different shear. So we've had pausing the amount of time to shecht, you've had pause the amount of time to inspect, and Rav Chanina says it's kadesh yavi behema acheres v'yishchait. It's not just to shear. He's clarifying the Rabbanon. When the Rabbanon said the amount of time to shecht, it's not just to shecht, it's to bring the animal in shecht. Now, let me ask you a question. Where's the animal? Is the animal right next to me? Is the animal down the block? Is the animal 2 blocks away? So it's the amount of time that it takes to get an animal and shecht it. Well, where's the animal? No, this is a clarification of the Rabbanon. It's kadesh yishchait, the amount of time to shecht, or he's saying no, it's to get the animal in shecht. Well, where's the animal? So yavi afilu me'alma nesad v'rechav shurim. Well, it can't be subjective because then it's like, well, where's the animal? If the animal's next door, it's this. If it's 2 blocks away, that's chaos. You can't have the animal. You can't have shiurim that are so subjective. It has to be an objective shear. So it says the Gemara, Amrav Papa, oimedes lahatil ikbenayu. What it means is the animal is right there. So I'm shechting. It's the amount of time for me to basically take the cow I'm shechting, push it to the side, and then take the other animal and shecht it. So it's not to get the animal from far away. It's basically I'm by the cow, I'm shechting, I pause. The amount of time that it would take for me to push this cow away, grab this cow and shecht. Okay. So Amri b'marav v'sheder of Yosi b'Rav Chanina, a slightly different version. Kedish yagbi'enu v'yarbitzenu v'yishchat. The amount of time is to lift the animal, then lie it down and shecht it. The one thing I heard about the explanation for this is that apparently to shecht a cow you want it to be in a good position. So the amount of time that it takes to basically lift up the animal and then lie it down properly and shecht. Okay. Daka l'daka, v'gas l'gasa. A small animal for a small animal and a big animal for a big animal, because obviously it's going to be quicker to pick up a goat than it is to pick up a cow. Amarava, hashaychit b'sakin ra. Interesting. Let's say you take a dull knife and you're slowly cutting and it's taking hours. You haven't paused. Pashas, you haven't paused. The Gemara is going to clarify in a moment. You haven't paused. You're just slowly going back and forth. You're not pushing. You're not pressing. You're just slowly cutting. The halach is afilu kol yom kuloi. It could take you hours. It's a kosher shechita. Because technically, the knife does not have any nicks. You're not pressing. You're just slowly cutting because it's not a sharp knife. The halach is, as long as you don't pause, it's kosher. Boy, Rava has a kasha. The question is like this. Let's say the amount of time that it takes to pause to invalidate a carbon is 10 seconds. What if I do 3 pauses that are 3 seconds each? Do they combine together? 4 pauses that are 3 seconds each. The amount of time to invalidate a carbon is 10 seconds. I didn't pause for 10 seconds, but I paused 4 times for 3 seconds. do they combine together to make it that it's now more than 10 seconds? Shehiyah is maushi itztarfu. So the Gemara says, "V'tiv shalei mididei." Well, didn't you just address that case? You just said you can cut an animal with a dull knife all day long. Now the Gemara assumes that you're doing some small pauses throughout the day, and you see it doesn't combine together. So the Gemara says, no. Hasam b'delaisha. The case of the dull knife, there's no pauses at all. You're literally constant movement. But I don't know what the halacha will be if it combines together for small pauses. By Rav Huna Breder of Nasan, Rav Huna Breder of Nasan has a kasha. Shah b'miyat simanim mahu. We have this shaila on Shabbos, very similar, and that is you shecht roiv of the animal and then you pause. Is it a problem? Do we say that because you cut roiv, the shechita was already done, it doesn't matter that you pause then? Or do you say no? As long as there's a pause during this shechita ceremony, it's going to be an issue. So you cut 75% of the animal and then you pause. Is that considered invalidation? Teiku, we are not sure. This last Gemara we've already had before, and that is Rav Shimon says the amount of time that it takes to pause is not to get a shechita, but it's in order to inspect the knife. My kedei bikar, what does that mean? It means to show the knife to a chacham. Now let me ask you a question. Where is the chacham? Is the chacham next door? Is the chacham down the block? That's the Gemara says, then it's subjective again. So the Gemara says no. What it means is shir bikar tavach. What it means is if you yourself are the rabbi, meaning in other words, in order for the shaykhid himself to inspect the knife, so the amount of time that it takes not to bring the knife to a rabbi, just the amount of time that it takes to inspect the knife. Okay, new topic, and this is going to take us to the end of the daf. It's not simple, but it's not super tricky. But here's the concept, okay? You have different terminology of different animals. You have what's called a nevela and a treifa. Let me just clarify what they are in the classic sense, and you'll see the issue in the Gemara. Now, what's the difference between the two? Both you can't eat. You can't eat a treifa, you can't eat a nevela. The major difference is a nevela gives off tumah. A treifa does not. That's the major difference. So if I were to ask you, like when the Mishnah deals with, is it a nevela, is it a treifa? It's just dealing with the practical ramifications is, am I able to, does it transmit tumah? What is a nevela, what is a treifa? Historically, a nevela is an animal that died without shechita. You go over to an animal, you shoot it in the head, that's a nevela. Classic. An animal drops dead from a heart attack. It dies not through shechita. That is a nevela. What is a treifa? A treifa is an animal that dies because of a birth defect, meaning you shech the animal, you check the lungs, and you realize that it has, not a birth defect, it has a defect that will cause it to die. So nevela, the animal just dies, not through shechita. Treifa is you shecht it and you inspect it and you find that there's an invalidation. Here's the shaila. What if I shechted it and my shechita caused the animal to die? In other words, I shecht with a nick in the knife. Now, when you have a nick in the knife, according to Rashi, that is called ikur. Ikur is a shaila. Ikur is one of the psulim. It's halach mashmasina. According to some Rishonim, ikur is dislocation. According to Rashi, ikur means there's a nick in the knife and it tears the simanim. So here's the shaila. I shecht the animal and I tear the simanim. A tear of the siman would be a treifa if it happened on its own. And then the animal dies. So here's the shaila. Is it a nevela or is it a treifa? In other words, why would it be either? Because you shechted it, so you could look at it two ways. You could say, well, it died through my maisa shchita, and it didn't die through a proper shchita, so that's a nevela, right? It wasn't a proper shchita. I ripped the esophagus because I used a knife with a nick, so I tore it. So was that a good shchita? No. So the animal died. Not through a proper shechita. That's a nevela. It's like I shot it in the head. Or do you say no? Because the animal, you gave it the treifa side, you gave it the treifa effect, that's considered a treifa. Again, it's not your classic case because usually treifa happens independent of the shechita, and usually nevela happens where there is no shechita. Over here, I killed the animal through the shechita. Is it a nevela or is it a treifa? And again, it's negeya for tumah. You want it to be a treifa. There's no tumah by a treifa. Nevela is more severe. So says the Mishnah, this was a machlokes tanoim. Shachar is haveshet. If you shecht the esophagus properly, uposak es gargeres, but the trachea you nicked. So you did the first pipe properly, but the second pipe you tore. You ruined the second pipe, so it's not a good shechita. Or the opposite. Pasak agageres, you tore the first siman, and then shachar es aveshem. Then you cut the second one properly. Yeah. No, esophagus and trachea. Esophagus is food. Aveshem is food. It doesn't make a difference for this discussion. I know. So the point is, you did the first pipe properly, then you tore the second, or you tore the first and then you cut the second. Or you only cut one pipe of the cow and then you just let it bleed out. Or you did chalada, which is you bore the knife in and then cut out the simanim, which is again invalidation. So all of these cases, you invalidated it through the shchita. Rav Yesheva of Omer Nevela, Rav Yesheva says it's a nevela. A nevela means an animal that died without a proper shechita. That is the case here. This was not a proper shechita. And it's more severe. Comes Rav Akiva says, no, treifa. It's a treifa. Because you gave it a treifa. That's considered a maisa treifa. It's a chiddush. Rav Yesheva disagrees with Rav Kiva, because again, Rav Yesheva says a treifa is where you shecht properly, and it has other issues. Over here, it was not a proper shechita. So says Rav Yesheva, klal am Rav Yesheva mishum Rav Yeshua. Rav Yesheva said this klal in the name of Rav Yeshua, who happens to be Rav Kiva's Rebbe. Kol shenivsela b'shchitas nevela. Klol shechitasi kiroi v'davar achagarim lalif sol treifa. He told Rav Kiva, I don't understand why you're disagreeing with me. Isn't there a rule? If the animal dies without a proper shechita, it's a nevela. If you did a proper shechita and there were side issues like a hole in the lungs, whatever, missing a ventricle in the heart, that's when it's a treifa. So in this case, if you kill the animal through a bad shechita, that's a nevela. So says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, hoidele Rav Akiva. Rav Akiva says, I'm asking, I agree. There's no longer a machlokes. Everyone agrees. If you kill the animal and during the shechita, you are not doing a good shechita, you mess up the shechita, that's an avela l'kuli alma. Good. Here's the Gemara's kasha, and this is going to take us to the end of the daf. We're not going to do the whole daf because we're going to stop by Gufa because it's a sugi till tomorrow. It's about 2/3 of the Amud base. Says the Gemara kasha, you're telling me right now, if you mess up the shechita, so I take a knife that's serrated, I cut the pipes, that tears the pipes in half, no good. We now say it's universally accepted that it's a nevela. At first, Rav Akiva argued, but then he was masking. It's a nevela. Here's the problem. Urmini, I have a contradiction. There's a Mishnah, 10 dafim from today. The Mishnah in Daf Membei says, Elu treifus bebehema. These are treifus. Go to the next page. Nekuvas aveshen upsukas agargeres. If you tear the trachea, the halacha is that it's considered a treifa. So wait a minute, you just got finished telling me, that was Rav Akiva's original psak, but now you got finished telling me that everyone agrees if you tear the trachea, because it's not a good shechita, that's an avela. So why does the Mishnah over there say treifa? It's not true, it's not a treifa. Now by the way, let me just tell you what the Gemara eventually concludes the answer, and it's just like a very simple answer, but we're going to have to go through 3 more complicated answers to get there. The concluding answer is, this Mishnah on Daf Mem Beis was authored by Rav Akiva before he retracted his view. Meaning Rav Akiva was the one who originally said that if you mess up the shechita, it's a treifa. In our Mishnah, Rav Yesheva says, what are you talking about? Rav Akiva says, fine, I'm asking. It's a nevela. So we said, Akasha, I Daf Membeis, it says treifa. The answer eventually is going to be that Mishnah and Daf Membeis was the view of Rav Akiva originally. So it's not a contradiction, it's just out of order. Okay, let's go with other approaches. So again, we have a contradiction. Our Mishnah says that if you mess up the shechita by tearing the esophagus, and doing the shechita properly, the rest siman properly, or the opposite, if you tear one of the simanim, it's a nevela. The problem is, Daf Membeis calls it a treifa. So that's question. There are going to be, I think 3 answers. Amar Rava, answer number 1, like kasha. Kansha shachad l'b'seif pokak, kansha pokak, posak l'b'seif shachad. His answer, which is going to be instantly rejected, is you have 2 simanim, yeah? So we said in our Mishnah, as long as you tear one of them, it's a nevela. The problem is over there calls it a treifa. So he says it depends which one you did first. Did you cut the first one, then tear the second, or tear the first one, then cut the second? In other words, which of the siman was torn first? The other one was done properly. Did you tear the first one and do the second one properly, or vice versa? He clarifies. Shachad l'b'seif posak. If you shech the first one properly and tear the second siman, nifselis b'shchitahi. That's an avela. But posak, But if the first siman you tore before you cut the second, so then it was like by the time you started cutting the second, it was already a treifa. So in other words, he wants to make a chilik between in the simanim, which one was torn first and which one was shechted first. Tear the first one, then shecht, that's a treifa. Tear shecht and then tear, that's an avela. Here's the issue. The issue is, what did our Mishnah say? And our Mishnah's conclusion was, everyone agrees it's an avela. And what did our Mishnah say? If I tear the first and shech the second, if I shech the first and tear the second, it's an avela. The Mishnah makes no distinction between which one is done first. Says the Gemara, what does our Mishnah say? I shech the first one and I sever the second. Or pasuk as a geres, v'shach as a vesher. Or you sever the first and shech the second. It's all the same. The Mishnah doesn't make the distinction. It doesn't matter which one you do first, as long as part of the simanim are torn in the ma'aseh shechita, it's an nevela. Nevela. So how could you explain the Mishnah saying that how could you say daf mem beis? It depends which one you tear first. Our Mishnah says both are the same. It doesn't make a difference. So says the Gemara, maybe our Mishnah means ukvar shachar esavesha meikara. Meaning maybe our Mishnah means it's only an nevela if you tear the second. But the Mishnah says if you shech the first and tear the second, or tear the first and shech the second. What do you mean? Maybe when the Mishnah says tear the first, it means you tore the first one after having shechted it. First of all, it's not what it says. Also, then they're both saying the same thing. It's no longer two cases. It's both you tore the second. Says the Gemara, Amar le shtei tshuvas b'davar. I have two issues with your interpretation. Number one, chada hainu kamaisa. Number one, you no longer have two cases. Because now you're saying that both cases of the Mishnah are the same thing, which is you tore the second. Also, that's not what the Mishnah says. My father pointed out, that's not what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah does not say you already tore or you already shechted. The Mishnah says what it says. So we're back to the original problem. Again, the problem is our Mishnah says if you mess up the shechita, it's an avela. The Mishnah and Daf Mem Beis calls it a treifa. So you know what the Gemara says? Change the Mishnah and Daf Mem Beis. The Mishnah and Daf Mem Beis, instead of saying treifa, saying psul. The Mishnah over there lists a lot of invalidations. I think like 18 things. So you know what you do? Here's what you do. Change the word of the Mishnah. Say these are psulim. These are invalidations. Some are treifas and some are nevelas. Take out the word treifa. Says the Gemara, Elama Rava, Elu asuris ketani. These are usr, meaning these are invalidations. Yesh men nevela, yesh men treifas. Some are nevela, some are treifa. But change the lashon of the Mishnah Daf Mem Beis. Here's the problem though. So now that you're telling me that the Mishnah Daf Mem Beis is not just listing treifas, because we thought originally the Mishnah Daf Mem Beis was just treifas. You tell me no. The Mishnah Daf Mem Beis is listing all invalidations. Here's the problem. There are some invalidations that are not listed in the Mishnah. So why doesn't it list other invalidations? You're telling me now it's listing nevelas also. I got two more for you. Well, that's not listed. Chizkiya said that if you tear an animal in half, it's an instant nevela. It should be listed in that Mishnah. If the Mishnah was just listing treifas, I get it. But now you tell me no. The Mishnah is just listing invalidation. So why doesn't it list that case? Or why doesn't it mention Rav Elazar that says that if you remove the hip joint of the animal, it's a nevela. So you should list there. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why those are not listed. Those are cases where the animal is a nevela while it's still moving around. The Mishnah Daf Mem Beis is listing nevelas only after the animal lies still. Okay. Says the Gemara, Ki Ketani nevela deloy metam mechayim, ava nevela detam mechayim like Ketani. So it's not such a kasha. Okay. Two more answers. Again, the kasha is our Mishnah says that if you mess up the shechita, it's an avela, according to both Tanoim, because Rabbi Yesheva convinced Rabbi Akiva to join him. But the Mishnah Daf Mem Beis calls it a treifa. So Reb Shimon ben Lakish says like this. Again, what's the case? The case is where you have you shecht and there's a laceration. Says the Gemara, Lakish Amar, kan sheshacha b'makom chatach, kan sheshacha shaloi b'makom chatach. I'll tell you the difference. If you shecht where the neck is already severed, meaning, so the neck gets severed either by a person's knife or by an animal, whatever, it's severed. If you shecht on the makom that it's severed, then it's a nevela. Why? Because if you cut on the makom of the incision, it's not considered a ma'aseh shechita b'chlal. Kan sheshachat shloi b'makom chatach. But over here, it's talking about a case where you did not cut in the place of the laceration. Okay, meaning Meaning, if you're cutting on the place where it's lacerated, then it's considered not a ma'aseh shechita b'chlal. If you cut on a separate makom, then it's considered a ma'aseh shechita. That's his distinction. The Gemara says, "Shaloi makom chataki davar achigarm lo lifsal damya." The problem is the rule is like this: once you already have the animals, you're telling me right now that if the trachea, let's say, is already majority severed, so it's already invalid, and then you cut it. If you cut on the spot, that's an avela. If you cut above it, it's a treifa. The problem is, once the animal's pipes are already severed, especially the trachea, which is the windpipe, once it's already majority severed, we look at it as if it's not there anymore. So the Gemara says, so once that's the case, it shouldn't make a difference where you cut it. Cut it below, cut it above the cut, it shouldn't make a difference. Says the Gemara, you cut the trachea, which is the windpipe. And then mid-shchita, after cutting the trachea, the lung gets punctured. I don't know how you know this, but whatever. The lung gets punctured mid, but you already cut the trachea. The halacha is ksheira. It's not a treifa. Why not? I thought the lung is punctured makes it a treifa. The answer is once you cut the trachea, we look at the lungs as if it's removed because that part of the body is already done. So if that's the case, then what does it matter whether you cut below the cut above? Once it's already cut, it's as if it's not there anymore. The Gemara says, "Alma kamanda mancha b'tikula damya." It's as if the entire part of that body is removed. So hachanami kamanda mancha b'tikula damya. So if that's the case, then it shouldn't make a difference between whether you cut it on the spot, above the spot. Doesn't make a difference. So back to the original problem, which is why in Daf Mem Beis does it call it a treifa when our Mishnah calls it an nevela? So the Gemara answers, I think the most simple answer, Ela Amr Rav Chia bar Abba Amr Rav Yochanan lo kasha. Kan kodem chazara, kan la'acha chazara, umishna lo zazam imkama. The answer is that Mishnah Daf Mem Beis was the view of Rav Akiva before he retracted his view. Rav Akiva's shita originally was that as long as if the animal had a laceration and you shechted it and basically you killed the animal b'shas shchita, it's a treifa. He retracted his view. So our Mishnah calls it an avela, over there calls it a treifa. That was the full spectrum Rav Akiva. Originally he called it a treifa, and then he eventually joined Rabbi Shevav to call it an avela. We'll stop here.